We're curious.
Well, I mean, there are certain positive elements to the whole event. One of which is that younger people are being homeschooled.
Yes.
I wish that my dear friend, the late Dr. Samuel L. Blumenfeld, were alive today. He'd probably, first of all, he'd probably be making millions of dollars, but he was right. I mean, he was the author of the whole homeschooling movement almost. Traveled, he spent time in China, he spent time in Australia, he was one of the founders of the modern movement, and he really exposed the takeover of the public education system in the United States and in the Western world by these so-called change agents, and did so with great documentation and great care. And he would be absolutely on cloud nine right now, seeing how the public schools are being exposed and how younger people are being taught at home. And I saw an amazing quote the other day from one of these professors who said that he really was had a big problem with teaching online because now the parents can see what he's saying. It's all out there in the open. He can't get away with
Oh my
some of the
God.
nonsense that he was getting away with. So there were positive elements to this.
Absolutely.
I think that the other element is that, and you've talked about this, David, that we are all more self-sufficient now. It's kind of like getting back to the days of the pioneer. We have to realize that the government is not going to take care of us. We have to be have a reserve of food and water, simple things. Battery power. I mean, we all know that we have to stock, have stockpile and be ready for some kind of a disaster. And then, of course, the third thing is that the Federal Reserve looks almost irrelevant now, with the Treasury issuing currency directly. And I think that if Donald Trump is reelected, God willing, then the Federal Reserve will be changed. I don't think they won't get rid of it, nor maybe should they, but it will no longer be this private cartel. It'll become an agency of the Congress and of the Treasury that will simply serve as economists deciding levels of currency, not making money from the issuance of currency.
Right.
So these are all positive things that if we got to study it properly and we understand it properly, then we can turn the tables on the conspirators.
And my favorite part of it, because I agree with you there, my favorite part of it is the exposure of the media at this time. How blatantly obvious it is that they are completely fake news. They're corrupt. They've been misinforming and lying to the American public. And of course, everywhere you look in the world, it's the same report that journalism is dead and all this, but it's being shown to the public. The public is seeing it and they're coming to alternative sources, quote unquote, alternative sources. They're
Mm-hmm.
actually looking for source material. They're actually looking for facts and information from real people that are on the ground that know what they're talking about, as opposed to just going to this spin machine. And that's one of the things I've loved about Trump's presidency is he's constantly exposed the media at every turn, and he's being proven correct on a daily basis now. So that's also another positive.
Well, I want to work with that a little bit because I'm concerned that people aren't understanding what you're saying. Because I totally agree. I mean, I think that if there's one thing that President Trump has done as a favor to people from all political persuasions, it's that he speaks plainly and he speaks truthfully and he doesn't mince words. He doesn't engage in this sort of double speak. It was French scholar Elaine Benescon which called it the language of totalitarianism. The idea that you learn to speak in code and usage of double language and double meanings that is becoming the classic means of communication for people in power. It's a tradition that goes back to the ancient Greek sophists. In fact, the word sophisticated comes from the Greek sophist movement, a movement that was criticized by Plato and Socrates because what they were professional liars. They would be hired by people in Greek society and Athenian society to lie and to present an image. We might loosely say that they were the marketers of their day. And I'm not saying that marketing is all lies, but you know what I mean? It's like
Right.
they would spin and they would brand and they would present. And it becomes a dangerous phenomenon when it's used by people in power that they tend to speak to each other. A classic example of it would have been Barack Obama. And Trump cuts through it. He doesn't do that. And I think that I'm looking forward to the Republican convention because the Democratic one was all about that. And everybody knows it. they're all winking at each other and using double language and avoiding the real talk, which was to take a look at the leftist platform that they put out. Nobody mentioned that. Nobody mentioned any issues. All they talked about was, oh, so and so looked great when they gave a speech, and did you see the great presentation? And it was all comment on the commentators, like a theater. It's sort of it's like a big show. And I hope that people can see through that. I understand that the ratings were bad, and that when Trump comes on, I mean, it's going to be like, hey, look, this is what's going on here. And to my way of thinking, that is an opportunity. That's a learning opportunity for people to start to think and to communicate more directly and more, in a sense, more like human beings rather than these automatic spin doctors. So yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna, yeah, and I love everything you're talking about. This is such an important thing, especially absolutely with the political stuff going on in the US and around the world. There's so much happening. I'm getting messages from people all over the place telling me what's going on the ground and wherever they are. I've been following what's going on in Canada and US politics. There's a lot going on, but then there's also what's going on with the lockdown, the pandemic, the all that fiasco that's going on as well. And people are more and more curious about really trying to get to the facts. And there's just been numerous examples of the media not just making mistakes, but actually planting information, reporting fake stories, lacing in clips from apocalyptic movies into their film reels to try to show, oh, this is footage from this city or whatever, but it actually turns out to be from like a movie trailer for World War Z or something like that. There's been all kinds of lies and misinformation that I've been looking at and documenting myself just with this pandemic over the course of the last 5 or 6 months. And then, of course, as you know, Charles, you've been doing this for a long time. I've been doing this for a long time. You can look at the history of the media. You can look at the Mockingbird Project with the CIA and the intelligence community. Mm-hmm. And this intelligence infiltration into media has been known in all these countries.
Oh, yeah.
Whether you're looking at the Mossad, CIA, MI6, there's been this intelligence and government influence in media for a long time. And that goes all the way up to looking at what we get out of Hollywood and the big 5 mega corporations that run all of that information. And then we're learning about how this works with the fact-checking websites, the Googles, the Facebook, social media. That's all coming out and showing that there are really only a few corporations and people in power that run and control that entire apparatus. And people are seeing that real facts and information and real people and real doctors, real journalists are actually being blocked, censored, and having all this fact checker spam put all over their posts, even though who are these fact checkers? They're meant to be independent. They're meant to be there to combat quote unquote fake news, but they're ending up being demonstrated again and again to be the purveyors of fake news. So even the fact checking sites are now under scrutiny for all kinds of corruption and taking money and all these kinds of things. So it's an incredible time to be alive and to see this unfold and to see people wanting to become a part of this process of researching what's going on, getting the facts, disseminating it out there, regardless of the censorship. And it's as if the harder they try to censor people that are telling the truth, the more they're helping people wake up because of the fact that they're censoring them. So that's another positive sign.
Well, I mean, we could talk about the censorship, and it's going to get, I think, real ugly, especially as the election approaches and it becomes, if in fact it becomes more obvious that Trump is going to win and that the Republicans might take Congress. They're going to, I mean, it's going to be an all-out war. I mean, we risk our small programs here in that. I wouldn't at all be surprised to wake up one day and find that everything's been removed, which is why I'm doing multiple platforms. And I know you are as well, David. It's the ownership has consolidated and is consolidating into the hands of maybe 3 or 4 big media entities. They all tend to think alike. They all tend to coordinate indirectly. I'm not saying they sit around in a smoke-filled room, but they don't have to. They think alike. I mean, my father's uncle was a member of the Communist Party, and my father asked him once, how do you guys do this? I mean, do you take your orders from the Kremlin? This is way back when. I mean, and he said, no, we don't have to do that because we all think alike. We all know what to do.
Interesting.
Right? I mean, that's how it operates. It's kind of like, it's as if they have a computer chip implanted in the back of their skulls, and it'll get these little stimuli go, go off, and then they function and they know what to do. They know how to march. And, these are the people that control the high ground of the culture. They control the high ground of business and corporations, academia, the arts, the sciences. I mean, it's becoming more and more pervasive. There is less competition. In a sense, we were hopeful that the advent of the internet might counter it, and for a while it did. But I figured that this would come. They're trying to figure out how to control it, and they are making major strides in that direction. So, it is a real war, and it's one that's occurring underneath the radar, with people who are reacting, and I include people on the left and the right, who are finding a common cause with this, whether we agree with each other or not. We do, want to have freedom going forward, and we want freedom for our children. We want to stand up for the principles that make us free, and freedom means you can sin. We're not all perfect. That's impossible. So, um, I want to talk a little bit about the pandemic in terms of. I'd like to hear your thoughts on it at this point. I mean, it bothers me that we cannot mention, for example, the name of a particular drug, and I know you know what I'm talking about, because
Yes.
if we mention that name, we'll lose our shows. And it's that bad. So what are your thoughts in terms of the severity of the disease, and what we should be doing about it?
Well, I think there's so much to unpack, and I've done my best to document this on my show. I've brought on different guests, I've done video logs, I've done presentations, and I've just been learning as I go, just like everybody else. And I've been looking at the mainstream sources as well as all the quote unquote alternative sources, just trying to get a handle on everything. And I decided that I would dedicate full-time hours to looking into this because I lost my business. My martial arts studio and health practice was completely shut down. The gym was shut down permanently. So that pushed me into a position where I needed another job, and I was already doing my online work and working with Michael on the Unslaved project and then my Truth Warrior project. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to invest full-time hours into that and into the research. I also lost 4 friends of mine to suicide over the course of this lockdown. I've got children. I've got, grandparents. I've got skin in the game like everybody else. And so I wanted to make sure the information I was going to talk about was backed up by evidence. And what I was shocked was that the minute I started, this was back in February, I was going back and forth to Los Angeles and doing some shoots there for shows like Unexplained and things like that. And that's when I started watching the live streams from the World Health Organization. And I just started noticing right off the back that this Tedros guy, who we can talk about in a minute, was favoring China and the government of China, specifically the CCP party, and was literally just half of the statements that he was making wasn't even about the pandemic or the virus. It was just glorifying just this amazing response by China, and they're so amazing and they're doing such a great job. And he went down and he met with and it was just this constant like blowing smoke kind of situation. And I was put off by that. And of course, I've been looking at these institutions for a long time, so it didn't surprise me. But I wanted to learn more about it. So I looked into the background of people like Tedros, the World Health Organization. It sort of refreshed my memory of all the stuff I'd been looking into prior. And, you keep going down and you keep looking into what they're saying. And all you can go off of is here's what they're saying. And then they're changing it. And then they're changing it again. And then they're contradicting themselves. And then people are building policy off all of these computer models that later turn out to be completely fraudulent. Even Neil Ferguson, the guy that basically put out the computer models that were predicting millions upon millions of deaths, he was so wrong. He had to resign. And yet everything still kind of marches on with that same vibe that this is some kind of Ebola-like plague and all this. So I started looking into the different theories, and some of the interesting things came out right off the bat. There were people who were doing genetic sequencing and looking into the actual virus itself, and were finding anomalies there that shouldn't exist in nature. And so right away, these are top level, these are highly degreed experts that were talking about how this is a manipulated virus. And there's a variety of different explanations for it. Did it escape a lab? Was it a vaccine that failed and then they tried to cover up the result of the vaccine? Was it an accident? Was it on purpose? I mean, because another thing that struck me was all the protests that were happening in Hong Kong and elsewhere in China. And then, you see the drone footage like a month later, and it's just completely dead in the streets and nobody's in the streets. So the first thought was, well, did the Chinese government just try to do something locally to try to get rid of all of this flack that they were going up against, keep people in control, whatever? And then did it just end up spreading around? And then I started to evolve the perspective of going, well, this could be bigger than that, because now we have all these big organizations like the World Health Organization, the UN, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Johns Hopkins universities that were getting together in October of 2019 to work on a pandemic exercise event known as Event 201. People can go look that up. They have an official
it's
YouTube
available
channel.
on YouTube. Yep.
This is not conspiracy theory.
Not at all.
This is fact, okay?
Yeah.
The explanation that they're going to give you is, well, they're just doing their job, just like firefighters do firefighting drills. They're just practicing for the event of something. But then you start digging into the players, the people that were involved in the exercise, who financially benefited from this whole situation, who benefited in terms of being able to gain more power politically, to push certain political agendas. The secret handshaking, the handshaking between the World Health Organization and the CCP party in China, which was very questionable. The fact that Tedros himself, the actual leader, he's not a doctor. He's been involved in numerous frauds. He's a very controversial character. He was also involved in a genocidal regime. He's got a horrible track record. There were people protesting at the day that he was actually voted in to get the seat at the World Health Organization. And the vote that made the difference to get him in came from the CCP party of China. So there were just some interesting connections there. And then you keep going and you keep unraveling, and you can go all the way back to 2010 with documents that came from the Rockefeller Foundation talking about how they already did planned scenarios as to what they need to do in the event of some kind of pandemic or crisis. And it's called Operation Lockstep. You can read all about it. And, on and on you go, realizing that they've been talking about this, thinking about it, planning for it for a long time. We had Dr. Anthony Fauci come out, I think it was in 2018 or 2019, where he said the Trump presidency will face a pandemic. There's no doubt about it. And so it just seemed like these weird predictions, the planning of it. And then you keep going and you realize, well, all right, all the stuff we've talked about, Charles, on our show about the push for these global government setups, the centralization of power, to the injection of Islamo-communistic, Marxist ideas into the West. We know there's been this battle going on for a long time. And we've got these big globalist institutions that have been trying to leverage all kinds of different crises, like the climate crisis or this crisis or that crisis, in order to centralize power in the world, take control, and bring in what they're calling the fourth industrial revolution, the Agenda 2030, the agenda for the sustainable development. They'll even come out and say the New World Order, and you start reading about all this, and then you see them pushing those agendas at the same time that we have a pandemic. It's as if nothing ever happened. And you go, well, is that a coincidence? Is it a coincidence that the same players that are doing planned exercises, that are funding this entire operation, that are behind it, that are, praising these different globalist institutions and this Chinese government and all that they're also the ones proposing things like the World Economic Forum's, new Great Reset, as they're calling it. And they want to reset the world and all this. So this is just a sketch of some of the research I've collected, as well as the science behind the masks, the vaccines, the lockdown. There's thousands upon thousands of now biostatisticians, Nobel laureates, top scientists coming from all over the world who have put their reputations and their careers at risk by coming out to say, we didn't need to do this. This is overreach. This is completely insane. The science does not add up. The numbers don't add up. The fatality numbers don't. So there's just so much contradiction and lies that have now been exposed as a result of this. I couldn't even possibly cover it all here, but just to sketch it out, that you get to the point where you say, okay, what I'm being told by the media and what these particular people are telling me, it's just not adding up. And when I sat back, I started saying to people, I'm like, you know what? When I look at the people and their reputations that are telling us all this stuff, I know that they are known liars and criminals. And so if we're listening and trusting known liars and criminals, what does that say about us? So that means that the people that are coming out to say, like Dr. Judy Mikovits and all these doctors and all these experts that have come out to try to voice their side are just immediately being censored. They're not allowed to debate. They're not allowed to have these discussions. There's no free market of ideas anymore. They're just immediately censored in censorship campaigns that have never been done before, like with the documentary Plandemic and Plandemic 2 talk about.
Totally removed. I mean, you've put it up on your site, and that's great. But
yeah. And so to me, this is the sign. I come from the martial arts background, Charles. I'm the kind of person, you got to prove yourself in battle. You can't just put stuff on a whiteboard and talk a bunch of game if you can't back it up. So when I see certain groups of people shutting down top level experts, scientists, doctors, and people that know what they're talking about, why would they be silenced as opposed to giving them a forum and a platform to debate their ideas with these World Health Organization experts that are handpicked and right now are representing a very, very shoddy case that has all kinds of holes in it and contradictions in it, that if I were to sell you something like that, within the first 5 minutes, you would not trust me with what I was selling. Yet we trust these known liars and criminals. So that's where I'm at it. I'm at the point where I think that, there probably was a real virus. It was a manufactured virus. It wasn't designed to take out millions of people. It was designed to just be potent enough to scare billions of people into acquiescing to this 200-year plus age-old agenda to centralize the economy, the government power, to destroy the West, and to use this as a way of implementing China-like policy on the world. And if people think that's some kind of crazy radical idea, I've got loads of documents from the CFR and these actual live streams and these events that happen in Davos, Switzerland, and all kinds of evidence to show you to support that idea.
Well, I mean, if people think that's a crazy idea, just take a look at where you are right now today, which is in a state of medical martial law. You're locked in. You can't go outside unless you cover the lower half of your head. You could be, I mean, everyone is frightened. That's enough proof of what you're saying. And, I don't know if the virus is manufactured or real. I think there is evidence that it emanated out of a lab. But either way, what is known is that Boutros and the World Health Organization sat on the information about it in China for 5 weeks while it was spread all over the world. And it was not actually spread in China. That we do know. And that to me is probably the biggest crime in our lifetime. I mean, it's an absolute horror that this would happen, and the blood of 100,000 people is on their hands for that. The idea, whether or not the virus is manufactured, we know that there is an agenda to control people and to control movement, and that's the de facto result of this. And it's an agenda that does go back, as you say, hundreds of years. It makes you think in the early part of the 20th century, there was a major think tank, the Carnegie Institute for International Peace. And it came out during the Reese Committee hearings, which investigated foundations in the 1950s, that they had a meeting in 1911. How do we bring about world socialism? How do we convince Americans to give up their levels of freedom? And they deliberated on it for about a year, and eventually their answer was, we need to have a world war. And that's 2 years later, that's what happened. In the 1950s, there's this group called the Hudson Institute in New York, headed up by an economist by the name of John Kenneth Galbraith, a Harvard professor, brilliant man. And they debated the same question. How do we convince Americans and condition Americans to give up their freedom and accept socialism? And what can we do to scare people into doing that? And they came up with two ideas. One was impending environmental catastrophe, which turns out to be global warming. The world is going to burn up into a crisp. And the second was an invasion from aliens from outer space. All right. Now, we know that they went with the first one, but it wasn't strong enough because enough people got it and they kind of were like, I don't think so. It's not something I'm going to give up my freedom for. So whether or not this pandemic is a part of that agenda, I think it is. But whether it is or not, we know that it's being used for that. We know that people have willingly given up their freedom. Businesses like yours have gone out of business, and people I know as well. People have been forced to shut down their shops and their restaurants and their stores. People are being told they have to stay in. They're frightened. They wear masks going out. Everybody's washing groceries when they bring them back from the store. And there's shortages. There's now impending shortages of food, and people are frightened. And so they're willing to give up their freedom. And we have governors in various states acting like at a dictatorial level that would have been unthinkable in this country without this. Now that we're here, I think that, and I'd like your opinion on this, David, I think that they are trying to prolong it. I think that the actual virus peak is over. Maybe, and again, I'm not a doctor, and maybe it might come back, but it seems to me that it was wrong to make younger people shelter people that are not at risk, and to shelter people that are older and at risk, which is the opposite of what they did. They had everyone who was younger shelter, and for older people in nursing homes, they put COVID-19 positive people in there, resulting in thousands of deaths. I think that probably more than half of the people who have died in this country were over, I think they were over 80, and they were in nursing homes. And you had, some of these so-called blue state governors like Cuomo putting COVID-19 people in those nursing homes. And to me, that's morally the most horrendous thing that you can imagine. So we know that it was mishandled. Do you think that they're trying to prolong it? Do you think they're trying to use it to, the old joke that it's going to end the day after the election if Trump loses?
Yeah, I think it's obvious. They're prolonging this well past. I mean, I think this virus is already circulating. I mean, again, I'm not an expert, but when I'm speaking from behalf of the experts that I have looked at and documented thoroughly. I've documented this for months and months. I did actually, I think 2 weeks straight of every day on my Facebook page, posting between 3 to 5 quotes with cited articles in journals from the doctors and and just quoting it all the time, every day, just showing people that there is no consensus about this in the way that they're trying to push it. There's so much more going on. And when you understand that, you're going to start to ask the question, well, okay, whether this was natural in some wet market, it got out of hand, and then they just kind of overblowed it, or whether it was actually manufactured and released, or whether this was planned in advance. However you look at it, you're going to end up in the same room. No matter what door you come in, you're going to end up in the same room, which is that this is something that is being used to change the political situation, not just in America, although that's the big central pillar, right?
Sure.
But worldwide, right? It's being used to excuse legislation. Like if you look at what's going on in New Zealand and Australia right now.
Oh, it's very.
If anybody has studied history, as you have, I go to you for the history. You're amazing at this. But if you studied history and you're watching this, you will know that what's happening there, that this is not about a virus anymore. Okay. There's so many indications of that this is now in a place where it's government overreach. There are things that there is a historic, unprecedented level of government power and control being wielded against people all over the world that we've never seen happen simultaneously around the world. And if you really look at the numbers and you understand the fatality number issue, the testing kit issue, being they're using this PRC tests that even the guy that designed the test said that they're not designed for dealing with influenza or coronavirus-like symptoms, that it's just an RNA test. Mm-hmm. So there's problems with that. As you said, there have been casualties from this, both from the virus and also from the result of the lockdown. There's been studies released all over I've got maybe 6 different studies that have been released to show that there have been more collateral damage as a result of lockdown of healthy people, as you were talking about, than the actual virus itself, which is now considered to be a 99.9997% survivable rate virus. And these are now, and that's if you're using official numbers. Okay. So they still have a long way to go before they're taking out before this thing is taking out what even the flu has taken out in certain harsh seasons. So we're dealing at this point with numbers that are akin to a harsh flu season. So of course there are deaths, there are casualties, there's things that we can do, but we've never locked down the entire world, plummeting the entire economy into absolute meltdown, resulting in a mental health crisis that nobody wants to talk about, with suicide rates hitting 650% or more in the last 6 months. And all the other things, as you said, like the cancer patients that couldn't get their treatments, non-diagnoses of illnesses, especially with elderly people who, as you say, in certain states were put into these homes and were just sort of forgotten about. None of the family could go see them. They had to die alone in their beds. It's an absolute disgusting mess. And people can sit back and wave it off as, oh, it's incompetence and it was mistakes and it was a pandemic and we didn't know. No, we knew. We had experts warning us. We had Professor Knut Witzkowski, who's one of the world's top biostatisticians, coming out and saying, the way we deal with this, because we don't have a vaccine, we don't have all these things, which we can talk about in a minute. In the beginning, he said, 4 weeks, this thing could be gone if we only isolate the immunocompromised and the elderly, who are the most vulnerable. Right. Children are just getting a sniffle and a fever, not even. Half the people aren't even showing symptoms, yet they're saying that they've had it. And what you do is you create natural herd immunity. And I remember even in the UK, they tried to go with this policy till they had to switch it. Sweden went with this policy. They didn't do the draconian lockdown. And now they're showing study after study after study that they've hit natural herd immunity with this thing. Then there's a study that just came out of Australia showing that, yep, the T cells, the white blood cells are responding. So if you've had it, you now have antibodies that will prevent you from getting it a second time. So much of this has come out, and you start to wonder, well, why are they working so hard to keep this thing going? Like, they didn't tell us to wear masks in April when this was at the peak of the spread. They were actually telling us not to wear masks. I've got footage of Anthony Fauci saying, don't wear masks. It's stupid. It's just a symbolic thing. And then later they're like, now we have to mandate the masks. And now it's what? It's August, and they're now wanting to mandate masks in Canada and other places that they haven't mandated them because they're worried about the next wave, which just so happens to be in the fall flu season when flus naturally fly around. So then you go, okay, well, what else is coming up that they're trying to use this to, I don't know, change the outcome of? Well, of course, it's the November election. So I think it's very reasonable that, at least in the case of the U.S., and we know that the U.S., this election doesn't just affect the U.S. This election affects the fate of Western civilization.
Oh, it does, clearly.
Right?
Yeah, the United States.
And so if you know that they've been trying to get Trump out of power since day one, 100% negative news coverage, et cetera, et cetera. So the fact that they're using this now to try to hold the countries hostage, keep people in fear, and we didn't even get into the protests that just suddenly randomly erupted right in the middle of this thing. And it was encouraged by those same Democrats of letting hundreds of thousands of people throng in the streets for weeks on end, tearing down statues, burning down buildings, destroying businesses, even being aggressive towards peaceful protesters that were just there to protest. Right. And then having doctors come out and say, yep, you can protest in groups of up to 100. It's okay to protest. That'll be okay, because you know what? The systemic police racism problem is more important than the virus all of a sudden. And it's like, what? Well, isn't this going to cause the death of millions? Do we see bodies in the streets as a result of that? What about the homeless population? How are they still kicking around? They don't socially distance, hand sanitize, or wear masks. So what's up, right? So you start to ask, well, what's the agenda? Well, agenda number one in my book is keep Trump out of power, try to get the mail-in voting so they can rig the election, number one. Number two, there's a bigger global agenda to bring in this big dream that they've been talking about and that they are now talking about openly. When you know that the World Economic Forum and a bunch of these groups had a big meeting in Davos, Switzerland, where they were talking about how to do this. They had emissaries come from the Vatican to bless the meeting and do an actual whole ceremony to bless this whole push. And now you have the actual admission from people like Klaus Schwab and all these other people who are working with China, and who are working with a lot of these organizations who are saying, we want to bring in a new world system. We need to end they put all the issues on the table. We need to end the climate change problem. We need to end the racism problem and all the liberal issues. And we're going to use this pandemic as an opportunity to do that. That's what they're saying. So I go off what they say. You don't have to speculate. You just got to listen to what they say and go with that.
No, I mean, they're not going to let this go to waste. I mean, it's sort of like was it Rahm Emanuel famously said, chief of staff to Bill Clinton or to Obama, don't let a good crisis go to waste. And there's a video of that, him saying that on one of the Sunday talk shows. And that's exactly what we're looking at. Now, David, you mentioned, and by the way, my guest is David Whitehead, and he is the host of Truth Warrior on YouTube. Excellent site. You mentioned or made allusion to the vaccine, and I think that there's a lot of money involved in that. There's the reason that we can't mention the name of the drug that you and I both know about is because it's cheap, right?
Yeah.
$20 gives you like 100 doses. It's been, it's a generic. It's been on the market since the 1950s. So the drug companies aren't going to make a buck off that, I mean, whereas the vaccine, I mean, that's big money. And that Bill Gates is invested in it. I think that Dr. Anthony Fauci is invested in it. I don't mean to make a sinister charge here, but money has a lot to do with it. The drug companies, I mean, that's a whole big story right there. Do you think that that's the deal with the vaccine? And more fundamentally, do you think this vaccine is something that might have a more sinister component to it?
I do. I've been researching the vaccine question for probably 18 years or so. I've been into this for a while. And actually, before I make this statement, I also want to mention to people that you can, so my main website is dwtruthwarrior.com, but also the work I do with Michael, which we're going to have you on very soon, Charles, is unslaved.com. So you can check that out as well. But yeah, to go over the vaccine, this vaccine, if we just look at it from a logical standpoint, I mean, what is the average time that any vaccine is supposedly supposed to go through these safety studies, which they've never been actually able to show that they go through the proper safety studies. But, in terms of the way they tell you about how vaccines are made, what is the typical timeline that they would say takes to develop a successful vaccine, especially a new one? Well, it's between, they say anywhere from 2 years to 5 years, but the real numbers are closer to 5 to 10 years because they should be doing the actual studies that have to do with the after effects and then the contraindications of this vaccine with other stuff. And does it work with these drugs, or what about different genetic makeups? What about different illnesses? If you have this genetic defect and you take this shot, will there be any? They don't do that, and they're not going to do that. And you've even got Bill Gates coming up and saying midway through this whole thing that we will not go back to any semblance of normality until the world population is widely vaccinated. And we need to now have multiple doses of the vaccine for each person walking on the face of this earth, man, woman, and child. And we need to do this in record time in a way we've never done before, and create a vaccine for a type of SARS, coronavirus that we have had how many years since the first, I think it's 7 coronaviruses have hit humanity. And in all the times those coronaviruses have hit, they have never successfully created a vaccine. And when you understand who was actually trying to create these vaccines and how many of them are not, they don't work properly. Look at the flu vaccine as a great example. We've had a flu vaccine for 78 years. There's all kinds of side effects with it, and they never even get it right every season. And we still have 650,000 people dying every year from influenza. So the vaccine clearly didn't work with just the flu. How is it going to work with the coronavirus that, we've never seen this kind of coronavirus before? It's a unique one on its own. Coronaviruses in general, they've had nothing but nightmares, health problems, and issues creating any kind of vaccine for those viruses. And again, this isn't me, David Whitehead, saying this. I can show you chapter and verse from the medical literature and interviews with actual doctors who are open about this.
Sure.
So you start to sit back and go, okay. And now we know that the number one funder of the World Health Organization, after Trump pulled the US out of there, is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who just so happens to be the one telling the world that the only way out of this crisis is a vaccine. And so they will be making the vaccine, and they will be financially profiting from it. And he will be regarded as the savior of the world. So, I mean, and that's just where it begins when you get into sinister agendas. How about the fact that now we know that they want to actually not just inject you with a shot to help you to stop this virus, but they want to have tracking technology put in there via something called quantum dot technology. Sounds like something out of a movie, but it's not. It's documented. It's openly talked about. Bill Gates is cheering about this. He's very excited about it. They've never done this before. And so this is the first time. It's even getting to the point, Charles, where they're literally talking about releasing genetically modified mosquitoes into the environment. And that these mosquitoes, you can go to Science Magazine from 2015, and they wrote about how these mosquitoes could be literally set up to distribute vaccines to people via insect bite. It's something out of a movie, but it's real. This is what they're talking about. So this is why I start to say things like, I just have trouble trusting these people. I really, really do. And I encourage everybody to look into the facts about this, because what we're being told is, in my opinion, a boatload of propaganda and misinformation.
elaborate a little bit, if you will, on this microdot technology. Is this some kind of a computerized entity that they're going to inject into your body, or am I off base on that?
Well, it's called an invisible quantum dot tattoo, and I'm actually right here on silencealert.com just to get the right facts. So this was released in December of 2019, and it's talking about how an invisible quantum dot tattoo could be used to ID vaccinated children. Okay, so this was December of 2019, so beforehand, and so they're basically talking about the technology, how they have various versions of it. They have these. It's like a skin tattoo with a barcode on it that can be scanned by an infrared.
Then this is just that. It's a computer chip of some sort that's going to be injected into a person's body.
That's right. And there's also other technology where they have what are called pepper-sized microchip flakes, which could literally be injected into you via syringe. They've been working on it. DARPA's been working on this stuff forever.
I mean, they do it to dogs. I mean, that's been out there for a long time.
Yep, it's been out there for a long time. And so I think that when I talk to people about this, I have my own personal feelings, and I've done my own research on the vaccine industry. And my number one thing to tell people about is that let's just understand something very, very important. You need to understand this, that this is the only system on the planet where these companies since 1986 are immune from prosecution or being sued by the public if any of their vaccines cause any kind of harm, death, or injury. Okay. Yeah. And for those people that still don't believe that vaccines do cause harm, death, and injury, you need to go look up things like VAERS and many of the other research. And there's many studies on this. I could go on for hours about it, that yes, many of these vaccines do and continue to cause all kinds of issues with certain people, which means if there's a risk, there should be a free choice as to whether or not you want to use this or use this. I call it the droxy. I think we can say that. And the other thing, or even do better. How about building your immune system and, becoming
strong? How about getting healthy and better nutrition? Right. And
none of these people are out there telling us, even though they don't have a vaccine to give us. Notice this, they're telling us, none of these media pundits or these doctors are telling us how to build our immune system. They're not saying,
go outside and get some sun rays in your face.
They're telling you stay inside.
Yeah, exactly.
Wear an incubator on your face that's going to have you just continually breathing in your own microbacteria, and your own.
Very unhealthy. Vitamin D is very good if you live in this part of the country. I'm up in New England. We don't get enough sunshine. Take vitamin D. There are different practical things you can do. Now, the idea, though, of injecting some kind of a tattoo, that's the end of freedom. That's the mark of the beast. I mean, I don't know about the Book of Revelation. It's not even a part of my canon, but, it seems to ring a little true here. If they put some kind of a code, a barcode into a person's body, they can decide what you can and can't do, where you can and cannot go. They're already doing it in China.
They're doing it here, Charles. Look, that's what I say to people. They're doing it to you right now, telling you where you got to stand, how you have to behave. You have to report your neighbors. You got people coming out of the States. I think it was California, where they were actually saying, hey, snitches, the thing about snitches. Well, in this case, snitches get rewarded, right? They're telling you to snitch on your neighbors like the Stasi police. And people should go look up what happened with the Stasi and the Khmer Rouge and many of these other things, where I've been reading a lot of Solzhenitsyn lately to try to refresh people's memory about how there will always be these people in our society and in our political structures that will use crises, whether manufactured or whether just real natural events. They will use these crises to take your freedom, which means they get more power. And they want to micromanage. If you've followed everything with the climate agenda and the proposals of the Green New Deal and all these other things, and you see the same people are now telling us what we need to do about this virus crisis and the whole industry and everything I could talk about here about it, you realize that they want to micromanage your life right down to the fine details, not just, tell you what laws and here, but literally monitoring. We're talking 24/7 monitoring. We're talking Google working with the CCP party in China, came out in hearings, by the way, to bring in the social credit system, the biometric face scanners, the towers that'll allow them to have a better ID, the satellites they're firing up into space, so there's better surveillance. So they're bringing in the new global technocracy at the same time they're giving us the solution for this crisis that in many, many experts' opinion is not an actual pandemic. In fact, the World Health Organization to this day has not been able to provide any actual tangible evidence that this is a pandemic. There might be a flu virus, there might be something that escaped, but it's not a pandemic scenario that requires half a year or more. And now they're saying this got to go on for years and years. Like Dr. Tam in Canada, our health minister, saying this is even the vaccine's not going to do it. We're going to have to social distance, wear masks, and have all this stuff in place and all these laws for years to come. And so you go, all right, so this is never ending. And then I put up a clip on my YouTube channel, Charles, called The New World Normal. And what it is a collection of clips from news media of different people saying and talking about, including Bill Gates and many others, talking about what they're calling the new world normal. And they're praising it. They're like, this is the new world. We need to do this anyways. We needed to do this anyways to save the climate. Humans are a bacteria on the planet, so we really got to manage everything. And so you just start to get this real, I don't know, you're going to get the feeling that something else is definitely going on here. And at the very least, they're using all these things, even the vaccines and all that, to gain compliance and to keep people in lockstep with whatever they want. So they've been wanting to end freedom for a long time. They want the destruction of Western civilization so they can create this new, utopian Borg-like world that they talk about. And what better situation to do than when you've created a whole world of hypochondriacs and paranoiacs over this virus who are willing to do whatever you tell them to stop this virus because they become afraid of it. So fear, once again, is a powerful weapon. And that's why I've always said, if the media can't be trusted, then that means it's up to us to become empowered citizen journalists, inform ourselves, inform others, regardless of the censorship, and to really make sure that we understand what's going on, because we're in an opportunity to do that. Whereas, say, in Germany, in Russia, in China, in Africa, in all these places, they didn't have the big access to the internet. They didn't have experts that they could look at and go, hey, this is what the government's saying, but this is what these people are saying. I get to make a choice. That didn't exist then. Now it exists. So we have to take advantage of this opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, we're never going to hear the end of it, so we might as well start to resist, and we might as well start to find ways to get on with our lives and take personal responsibility for your own health. I'm not saying go out and not wear a mask in certain situations, but generally speaking, start to operate based on your own self-interest and what you know. Now, David, we're reaching toward the end, and I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but I want to ask you about this movement called the QAnon.
Sure.
I don't know a lot about it. I tend to think that it's probably a legitimate and good thing mainly because of the people that don't like it. That tells you everything you need to know. The New York Times getting all panting and out of breath over this and big articles, and they're right wing, and so it tells me that they're probably onto something. But I don't know that. Maybe they're not. Maybe it's some kind of a phony thing. My sense is that what it's about is they're trying to expose an international cult of pedophiles and satanic worshipers that are operating at the very highest levels of government and culture. Now, that may or may not be true, but whether or not it's true, it's a legitimate question to ask, and it should be investigated. That's why we have a free speech and a free press, so we can investigate that kind of corruption and find out whether it's true. So for journalists who are there dumping garbage on this idea, fine. Go out and check it out for yourself, and let's do some real old-fashioned gumshoe investigation of this and find out. If you want to discredit QAnon, fine. Let's find out if what they're saying has any evidence. My suspicion is that there's a lot of evidence for it. What do you know about it, David?
Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole thing on it. I've prepared even a couple notes. We'll go through whatever I can squeeze in for you. But basically, I've been conducting my own research operation on QAnon for the past 7 or 8 months now, and I've been collecting information. It struck me very similar to the vibe of what happened when Trump got elected, where my initial response was, oh my God, another politician. We can't deal with, I just don't trust politicians. But then I'm like, hold on, Trump isn't a politician. He's a new kind of guy. He doesn't come from the same. So then you, oh wait, and the media hates them, and all the top elites in the world and the royals and the Pope and all these people are saying they don't like him, and the media is attacking him 24/7. Hey, whoever the media attacks 24/7 is probably who you need to listen to. It's just a good place to start, in my opinion. But hey, as you said, Charles, everybody has to research it. And that was the first thing that struck me. Okay. There might be cultish elements within the movement because people are seeking leadership. They're seeking, it's a crazy world. People need help right now. Right. But that doesn't invalidate the actual posts, the story behind it, the connections to Trump and his tweets, the evidence that's there, the numerous proofs that I've collected to say, hey, there's something legitimate here. And let me just say, let me ask the media, why are they asking Trump right now about the QAnon? Is there a danger? Are they going to go out and start causing violence when there hasn't been any violence started by QAnon people or Trump supporters? By and large, it's been, the vast majority has come from the other side with the rioting, the looting, the killings, all this. Right. And then the other thing is, why don't they ask them about the content that QAnon is trying to expose? Exactly. And so that's where I go. So here's what they're trying to expose. QAnon encompasses a number of quote unquote conspiracies ranging from 9/11 to Obamagate, the coronavirus hoax, threat of China and world communism, the Clinton body count, the issue with the Saudis, to the existence of even the alien question, the role of the Vatican, the royals, which they call D6, Hollywood, the various cults that run in Hollywood, the CIA, MI6, Mossad corruption and connections, to all the way of dealing with human trafficking and rampant pedophilia and ritual human sacrifice. So when they just recently asked Trump, of course, he has to have plausible deniability because if this is legit, it's an ongoing operation to basically operate as a back channel to the public to bypass the mainstream media, which is why Trump went on Twitter right off the bat, and which is why when you compare his tweets to the posts of this mysterious entity called Q, who posts on these anonymous forums like 8chan, 8kun, 4chan, etc., leaking information and breadcrumbs essentially to research. When you compare it, you start to really see a picture that's very, very interesting. So I got in there, I've been interviewed a few people, I'm going to be interviewing more people, and I just keep telling people, look, we can do this without a QAnon movement, even without Trump. Freedom-loving people, if we band together in this and we resist this and non-comply with it, we don't even need it. But here's the thing. The vast majority of people are not there. They're not like you and I, Charles, where they have this natural desire to research and learn the truth. So what this was, in my opinion, was an operation to essentially, as I said, operate as a back channel, provide the public with information to go research, and then almost every second post is about doing your own research, thinking for yourself, using the Socratic method, teaching people what the Socratic method is, writing it in a way that's going to trigger logical thinking as opposed to just what I've studied for years, which is propaganda, cults, and all this kind of stuff. If it's a cult, it's the first cult in the world that's telling you how to think for yourself. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there's some very interesting things that even Trump has said over these years and shown that, indicate that there's something going on. There's been admissions from, or not admissions, but even you had like General Flynn, who's been in the news and who's been attacked, but we're going to get more on that, who came out and said he did the pledge, which was something that started on the QAnon boards. And then he said, where we go one, we go all, which is, it comes from the Navy, it comes from white squall. It's a military term. It's just talking about military strategy and all that. And it's something that the QAnon movement uses. He came out and said that. We had a statement recently from General Paul Vallely, who a few months ago, and just so people don't know who he was special ops for over 20 years. He was an Army Ranger that worked in his position since the 60s, even under Reagan, etc. So he's a well-decorated general. And he says this, okay? He says, let me just tell you the truth. QAnon is tied to information that comes out of a group called the Army of Northern Virginia. Now, this is a group of military intelligence specialists of over 800 people that advise the president. The president doesn't have a lot of confidence in the CIA or even the DIA. So he relies on these real operators. Most of them are special operations type people, and this is where Q picks up and gets their information, as I understand it. So that comes from a general. There's many other proofs that people can look into. They should read the actual posts as opposed to just reading what people say about it definitely don't listen to what the media is saying about it, because they're grossly misinformed and they're asking the wrong questions. And I would say that if you think about it, right now, what do the people following the QAnon movement really want? A lot of them are just family, fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, patriots, people that love their country, people that see that there's been something going on to destroy their country and turn it into something completely different. And then also the human trafficking, pedophilia thing is a major motivator for people. And I got to say this, even if QAnon ended up being some big hoax or whatever, I would actually still be grateful for it, because it's woken up over 200 million people around the world to things that I've personally been researching and studying myself for decades and decades. Stuff I think of people like former FBI Director Ted Gunderson and some of the stuff he used to talk about.
Yep.
If you watch what he talked about in the 80s and 90s and then read half these Q posts, it's the same information. It's information that we can all validate. So, and then the problem with all these things is that you have the core thing, like the Q boards, the Q drops, the Trumps thing, the whole that, and then you have the people that crowd around it, and there's all kinds of misinformation that comes out. There are people that, they're a bit batshit, right? So you kind of take them, but what happens is that becomes an easy smokescreen, so that regular people that are new to this are just going to look at those people and go, it's crap.
Right,
but if
that's
you
what they
bypass that and you look at it yourself,
yeah.
it'll speak for itself. That's just how I see it.
Yeah, I mean, their enemies tell me everything I need to know about it, and that they're going after the deep state, to use President Trump's term. And to my way of thinking, that's the responsibility of a free media, and it's not an easy job. Never was an easy job, but that's what we're trying to do. That's what you're trying to do. So, David, I want to thank you for joining me today. It's been a great conversation. Let my viewers and listeners know where they can get information about you and your show.
Charles, I always love talking to you. I look forward to also hosting you on the Unslaved podcast very soon. We love you over there. I get lots of great comments about you. And if you want to find out more about me, there's 2 websites. All my stuff is at dwtruthwarrior.com. My social media links are there. And then also follow us over at the Unslaved podcast. There's Q and then there's M. I work with M, Michael Tsarion, one of the greats. And we drop all kinds of very, very valuable information for you on all kinds of subjects. So those are the 2 places to find me.
All right, David, listen, thanks a lot. I'll talk to you soon.